Have you ever wondered why World War I, one of the most devastating conflicts in human history, is often overshadowed in popular consciousness by its successor, World War II? This question, intriguing as it is, sets the stage for our exploration today. We will delve into the depths of the past, unravel the tapestry of events, and examine the intricate details that led to the Great War. Join us as we journey back to the early 20th century to unravel the complexities of the Great War. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in June 1914 ignited the fuse of World War I. This single event, a spark in the tinderbox of international tensions, set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the course of history. The assassination took place in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, a province that was annexed by Austria-Hungary just 6 years prior. The assassin was a young man named Gavrilo Princip, a member of a Serbian nationalist group known as the Black Hand. His objective? To break off Austria-Hungary's South Slav provinces so they could be combined into a Yugoslavia. The political climate of Europe at the time was a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and tensions. Nations were jostling for power, empire building was the order of the day, and nationalism was a potent force. The major powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy on one side, known as the Central Powers, and France, Russia, and the United Kingdom on the other, known as the Allied Powers, were locked in a delicate balance. The assassination of the Archduke was like a match thrown into a powder keg. Austria-Hungary, backed by Germany, issued an ultimatum to Serbia. When Serbia could not comply with all of the demands, Austria-Hungary declared war. Russia, bound by a treaty to Serbia, started mobilizing its forces. Germany, allied to Austria-Hungary, viewed this as an act of war and declared war on Russia. France, allied to Russia, found itself pulled into the conflict, and so the dominoes fell, one after the other, plunging the world into war. This war, which many thought would be over by Christmas, would rage on for more than 4 long years, claiming the lives of millions and changing the face of the world forever. The assassination of a single man had lit a fuse that led to the explosion of the world's first truly global conflict. The world had no idea of the scale of the war that was about to unfold. It wasn't long before the conflict, initially limited to Europe, spread across the globe. The spark that had ignited in the heart of Europe soon engulfed every corner of the world, reaching as far as the distant lands of Africa and Asia. The European powers, holding vast colonial territories across the globe, found their dominions drawn into the tumult. The world map was a chessboard, and the colonial empires were the players, their colonies the pawns in a game of power and dominance. In Africa, the war was a shadowy echo of the conflict raging in Europe. The continent became a battleground for the colonial powers, with territories changing hands and borders redrawn in the wake of battles fought by soldiers far from their European homelands. Skirmishes erupted from the sands of North Africa to the jungles of the Congo as the colonial powers sought to gain an advantage over their enemies. Meanwhile, in Asia, the picture was no less complex. The Ottoman Empire, having entered the war on the side of the Central Powers, found itself at odds with its neighbor, British-controlled India. The Middle East, rich in oil and strategically vital, became a hotly contested region. In the Pacific, the German and British empires clashed over their island colonies. Even distant Australia and New Zealand were drawn in, their troops fighting in places as far-flung as Turkey and Palestine. The war had become a global chess match, with battles taking place on multiple continents in diverse climates and amongst different cultures. Soldiers from all corners of the world found themselves in unfamiliar terrains, fighting for causes dictated by distant governments. The ripple effects of the European conflict reached the furthest corners of the globe, proving that no country, no matter how remote or neutral, could escape the shadow of the Great War. It was a stark reminder that in an increasingly interconnected world, a spark in one corner could set the entire globe ablaze. The world was now fully embroiled in what was becoming a truly global conflict. The war introduced the world to the horrors of trench warfare and the destructive power of new technologies. Trench warfare was a grim reality of World War I. Soldiers huddled in narrow, muddy ditches, the trenches that stretched for miles across the Western Front. These trenches, separated by a barren and bullet-riddled landscape known as no man's land, served as the front line for the majority of the war. Everyday life in these trenches was a brutal test of endurance. Soldiers faced the constant threat of enemy fire, as well as the harsh elements. Rain turned the trenches into muddy quagmires, while winter brought freezing temperatures. And let's not forget the rats, lice, and disease that ran rampant. But it wasn't just the conditions that made this war so horrific. The advent of new technologies added a new layer of destruction and death. Tanks, a new invention during this period, began to play a significant role. Initially developed by the British as a means to break through the enemy's trench lines, these armored vehicles changed the face of warfare. With their ability to traverse rough terrain and withstand gunfire, tanks granted armies the mobility they had lost in the trenches. In addition to tanks, chemical weapons made their sinister debut. Chlorine and mustard gas, released in clouds or packed into artillery shells, caused unimaginable suffering. These gases could cause blindness, severe burns, and death, often lingering in the trenches and turning them into death traps. This was a war of firsts. The first time the world saw the widespread use of machine guns, submarines, and airplanes in warfare. The first time nations had to grapple with the terrifying potential of chemical weapons. The war also saw the first widespread use of propaganda, as nations sought to control the narrative and maintain morale at home. This, coupled with the massive loss of life, led to a disillusionment that would shape the 20th century. This was a new kind of warfare, one that would scar generations to come. In 1918, after 4 long years of fighting, the war finally came to an end. The echoes of the last gunshots faded, and a tense silence fell over the battlefields. The world held its breath as the leaders of the warring nations gathered around a table in the Palace of Versailles. On June 28, 1919, an array of signatures marked the end of the Great War as the Treaty of Versailles was signed. This document, meant to ensure peace, ironically sowed the seeds of resentment and anger that would later plunge the world into another global conflict. But as the ink dried on the treaty, the world began to take stock of the devastation left in the wake of the war. The landscape of Europe had been drastically altered, both physically and politically. Entire towns had been reduced to rubble. Fields once lush and green were now barren and scarred with trenches. The map of Europe was redrawn, empires fell, and new nations emerged from the ashes. The human cost was staggering. An estimated 9 million soldiers had lost their lives, and a further 21 million were wounded. Civilian casualties from disease and starvation were also high, and the Spanish flu pandemic that followed in the war's aftermath claimed even more lives. The war also left psychological scars. Called shell shock at the time, we now understand this as post-traumatic stress disorder. Thousands of soldiers returned home haunted by their experiences, forever changed by the horrors of the trenches. The war also sparked significant social and political changes. Women, having taken on new roles during the war, began to demand greater rights and freedoms. The Russian Revolution in 1917 marked the rise of communism, setting the stage for the ideological battles of the 20th century. The war was over, but its effects would shape the world for decades to come. From the ashes of the Great War, a new world order emerged, one that would be tested again just 20 years later. The cost of the war was high, but its lessons invaluable. It served as a grim reminder of the devastating power of conflict and the importance of striving for peace. Why then is it so important to remember World War I? This monumental conflict reshaped the world in ways that are still being felt today. It marked the end of empires, the rise of new nations, and set the stage for political changes and conflicts that would reverberate through the rest of the 20th century and beyond. The war also brought about radical transformations in warfare technology, which led to a shift in military strategies and tactics. This technological evolution continues today, serving as a sobering reminder of the potential for human ingenuity to be used for destructive purposes. But perhaps the most enduring impact of World War I is the lessons it offers us. It serves as a stark testament to the devastating consequences of nationalistic fervor, rivalries between powers, and a failure of diplomacy. It reminds us of the tragic cost of war, not just in terms of lives lost, but also in the societal, economic, and psychological toll it takes. So we remember World War I to heed its lessons and to honor those who lived through it. We remember it to understand the roots of many of the challenges we face today. And most importantly, we remember it to reaffirm our commitment to peace and diplomacy and to strive to prevent such a catastrophe from recurring. World War I, often overshadowed by World War II, remains a stark reminder of the destructive power of conflict and the importance of striving for peace.